Okay, good morning. So we're marching through Shin Samach Gimel. We're up to Seif Chof Dalet. So we're talking about a mavui which you want to put a lechi or a korah or Tzuras HaPesach in front of it to enable you to carry in that mavui. So it says the Mechaba in Chof Dalet, Peiras al HaKorah Machatzeles. You got a korah going across the front of the mavui, but now you want to sort of strengthen it by putting a machatzeles, a mat over the korah, some sort of curtain or mat or something. Ve'ein nugaz ad hakarka. But the trouble is the mat, which is sort of hanging over the curtain, doesn't reach the ground. So the rule is as follows: Im gavoya me'haaretz shleish tefachim psula. If the mat is higher than 3 tefachim from the ground, that puzzles it. In other words, it does not function as a good korah because you've covered it over and you can't see the korah, and it's not a mechitza either because it's got a breach of more than 3 tefachim from the bottom of it. Shahari kisa korah ve'ein nearest to bottom miyos korah. You've covered over the korah, therefore it doesn't function as a korah, and you've taken away the name of its status as a korah. Or mechitza gam kein eina, and the mechitza is also no good. Like I just said, aval im heniach korah rechava. But if you have a wide rechava which goes down a little bit, then kashera. Okay, we'll explain that in the Mishnah Berurah. Says the Mishnah Berurah Sivkot Ein Ches Machzeles, some sort of mat hanging over the korah. You were trying to do something positive. You wanted to be miyape to strengthen the heta. He wants to make it like a better korah or something. And you tied it against the wall. And you tied it to the wall, so it's going to be a good mechitza. Psula, you've actually messed up because even if the machatzeles is taller than 10 tvachim, you've messed up your korah because ve'ein nearest imkain less kan heka. You haven't got the heka of what the korah should function as, and you haven't got a mechitza because you've got a breach underneath it of 3 tefachim. Okay, avol. The Mechaber then finished off and said, "Imeniach korah chava," which means you've got a korah which is quite thick. It goes in a long way. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Pesif Kotten Pei Aleph. Korah chava rotzolema shi rechava asar tefachim. It goes in 10 tefachim. It's wide 10 tefachim. V'hava mina kiven shi rechava kolkach. Now, why it's kosher? This is going to be okay. Now, why? What's the hava mina? So I might have thought hava mina kiven shi rechava kolkach. Since it is so wide, it's 10 tefachim deep into the mavui. Shem mechitza alea v'lo shem korah. It's got a status of a mechitza, not a korah. Or mechitza kasheira eina, and it's not a proper mechitza because the hagavoya min haaretz harbek mob machzeles. It's too high up, and you've got a gap of more than 3 tefachim underneath it, and therefore it's not a functioning mechitza. Kamashmalon the ksheira. Kamashmalon the ksheira, that it's not a problem. Why? Not because it's considered a good korah, and therefore it's going to function as a korah. I might have thought that I treat it as a mechitza, which is no good because you've got a group of 3. Kamashmalon to kshera because it's functioning as a korah. Because of its size, you don't take away the fact that it's got a din of a korah. And the previous case was different. The chisa is a korah ve'in the korah. There the problem was you've covered over the korah, and therefore it's a problem.
It's that if it's covering, but you know it's there because even though it's covered, because it's not standing on its own.
Yeah, okay, but it's not nikah. It's not. Bolet is not so clear. Yeah, that was the Havamina. Kamashmalon, you covered it up. It's no good. Okay. And then the Mechaber just ended off and said this very wide korah, even though it goes nimsheches ksas l'matzim is kasheira. So it says in Mishnah Berurah Peipes, Kam achronim niskashu b'dvarav. So many achronim struggle with this Mechaber. The mashma milshena implies the bolashmin and afilu ksas me'aker rechava nichnas l'tzeich asar tefachim atachtenim shel mavi gam kein kosher. Even if it goes lower than 10 tefachim, it's okay. Dominim royen es hamikza hazeh ki'ilu einay v'aker medes rak l'mal me'asar. We sort of discard the bit below the 10 tefachim. Kedin hechsher kara mevu b'sif chavov. Avol be'emes ze'ena, but that's not really the case. The im hoya nichnas ksas me'recha v'aker v'teich havish l'asar atachtenim psula. On the contrary, if it does go into the airspace of 10 tefachim, then it will passel it. Because you need to have an airspace of 10 tvachim from the ground up to the korah, and therefore it would passel it. Okay, that is the end of Chaf Dalet. So just to summarize Chaf Dalet, what do we say? You've got a Korah going across the front of the Mavui, and with good intentions, you try and strengthen the effect of that Korah. You put a machatzeles, a mat or something, over the Korah, and there's a gap of more than 3 tefachim underneath the machatzeles, the mat, to the bottom of the ground, you've messed up because it's not functioning as a Korah, because it's not nikah anymore as a Korah. You've been mevatlit, and it's not a good mechitza because you've got a breach underneath it of 3 tefachim. That's the summary of Chaf Dalet. Okay, Chaf Hey. Now Chaf Hey, you're basically, if you look at the picture in 68, you are putting 2 pegs, inserting 2 pegs into the top of the wall, and you're resting your Korah on top of that. So if you look at picture 68, you'll see it more clearly. This is what the Mechaber is describing. Says the Mechaber Chaf Hey, Noat shtei yeseidos akumois el shnei kostei hamavui. You're inserting 2 pegs into the top of the wall, which are bent sort of on a slant. El shnei kostei hamavui va'akmimus anoted l'teich hamavui, and it's bent inwards towards the inside of the mavui. And then you put the beam, the Korah, on top of those pegs. Ve'ein b'yesedes tefach, and the pegs themselves are not 1 tefach wide, which is the requirement for a Korah, so it's not functioning as a Korah. Shehu shir Korah lios nechshavim k'Korah, which is the requirement of a Korah. Im einam gavoim mikos le'amav v'shleisha. If they're not higher than 3 tefachim from the top of the wall, ve'ein b'nitzias and shleish k'sher, they're not going in 3 tefachim. She'on roin ki'ilu heim al kos le'amavui or ki'ilu ha'Korah negas b'mavui. Then that's okay. The Korah, as if it's touching the wall, we apply lovud, and life is good. It's a good Korah. Then psula, that is no good. So essentially, what the Mechaber is saying is this: you can construct it in that way. You can take 2 pegs and put them on an angle and rest the Korah on top of it, even though the pegs are not 1 tefach wide. So it's not functioning as a Korah, it's just functioning as a support for the Korah. That would work so long as it's within 3 tefachim, the pegs themselves are less than 3 tefachim, and the incline, the way it goes in is also less than 3 tefachim. Okay, because if it's within 3 tefachim, you're saying love, and it's as if the Korah is now on top of the wall, and it's a proper Korah. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Pei Gimel, Akumish al Sheni. He's describing this picture now. The 2 pegs are on both sides of the mavui, the top wall, b'shipua at an angle, and they're pointing inwards, like in the picture. And the Korah is resting on these 2 yesedas. Rotzolema, says Mishnah Berurah, Pei Daled, v'yesh kan shnei reyusa. Now you've got 2 problems here, 2 deficiencies. Achas, you haven't got the Korah directly on the wall, it's on the peg. It's just on it's sort of hanging, as it were, in the air, just supported by these 2 pegs. So number 1, it's not on the wall, that's one reyusa. Sheinis, another problem is, the Korah itself is too thin. It's not stretching across the entire width of the mavui. The ein b'yesedes tefach, and the thickness of these pegs is less than a tefach. The iyavim, he said, is roch of tefach, because it were a tefach. Leich baslan b'mashakar atzma kasari. The fact that the Korah is too short and doesn't stretch across the whole width of the mavui wouldn't bother us. Because the pegs would function as a Korah. So the rule is that if it's within 3 tefachim, we say it's kasher. Says the Mishnah Berurah, to b'mesh ein goyven yeseides because the mavui shleisha tefachim amrin chavot rami. We apply the principle that you may remember from your from Hilchos Sukkah days, from Gemara Sukkah days, chavot rami, which basically we reduce it. What does that mean? Ki'ilu ha-Korah nechbat v'nishbat etzel ha-ksolim. We sort of theoretically, conceptually reduce the Korah to be resting on the actual walls themselves. V'avshadayin kotzin, true, it's too narrow. It's not wide enough to stretch across the whole mavui. Kiven she'ein b'nitziyason shel hasedas shleisha, since the yesedas haven't got a gap of 3 tefachim, imkein ha-Korah ein rechoika shleisha tefachim k'solim, amrin and loved. So you apply loved. Okay, there's a lot of discussion here because you've got two halacha mesinas at play. And the footnote's got an interesting note to Machlekes Rekiv the Chaznish, exactly how that works in terms of the sequence of it. But anyway, that's not for now really. But that's just like to point out. But if it's more than 3 tefachim, then psula. The bashir shleisha lo amrina chavit bekoira v'lo lavet. Because again, that's always the magic number. 3 tefachim, we're not going to say chavit rami, and nor are we going to say lavet. Okay, that is the end of Chof Hei.
So if you suspended the Korah, you suspended it from one building over there and one building over there, and it should literally just hang above it,
right,
not touching the wall, as long as it's within
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, Chovov. Now this is a very long sif, which will take us stretch over till next time. But let's start it. Chovov. Had the mavui nitza belechi occurred. Now that which we said that the mavui can be rectified by putting a lechi there, which is the uprights, or a kaira, the beam across. It's got to be that the height of the mavui is at least 10 tefachim. Murvachim means sort of expansive tefachim. And the width cannot be more than 10 amas, and we're being machmin now, which means very non-expansive measurements. And it goes in 4 amas. Again, we're being machmin. It's got to go in at least Murvachis, very expansive amas, 4 amas. But if it's missing any of these dimensions, then the only eitzah is not to use a lechi or a kaira, but to use a tzuras HaPesach. Now let's do the Mishnah Berurah. If you look at the bottom picture, this is a picture drawn from the. Well, let's do the Mishnah Berurah and you'll see this. Rotzalei mashem akarka she'amovi ein nomach. So the height from the floor up is less than 10 tefachim. Now if you look at the Shatzi and Nuntes, he says, "Vafilim chutz lemavoi." Can you see the bottom there? "Vafilim chutz lemavoi soviv hamovi amachitz shamovi gvoyin asar tefachim." Even if the Rishus Rabbim, which abuts this mavoi, does have a height of 10 tefachim, ach teicha mavoi, but the bit inside the mavoi, dahainu karka osoi. Etc. Even in that situation, so if you look at 71, he's got a note on that Shatzian, a diagram on that Shatzian, which gives you an indication of what we're talking about. So he's describing where the Rosh Hashanah is actually, it's sort of, it's like a step up, it's a higher ground in the Mavi itself. But the point is, it's a good diagram to show us what we're trying to show here. That if the height of the Mavi is less than 10 Tfachim, or the width is much bigger, is bigger than 10 amas, or it doesn't go 4 amas in, then you haven't got the dimensions, and a Korah or a lechi are not going to help you, and you need the tzuras HaPesach in that situation. That's the key point.
The picture showing that the Rosh Hashanah is a step down and the Mavi is a step up.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, that's the particular case of the Shatzian that he's talking about, but at least conceptually we can now understand a little bit what the Mechab is describing. Okay, so back to the Mishnah Berurah Sifkot and Pei Ches. Rotzalema, that Shemakarka Sheba'am Mavi Ein Nomach Mebifnim Neged Haksolim Shiasar Tfachim. So the ground is sort of within 10 Tfachim of the walls that surround the Mavi. Nechshav Ki'ilu Ein LeMavi Bechitzas. It's as if the Mavi hasn't got mechitzas. It's Ein Mechitza Pechuz Miasara. You can't have a mechitza less than 10 Tfachim. Muruvachim, and they've got to be 10 Tfachim which are muruvachim, expansive tefachim. Now, what does that mean? Of a sefer matzum tzamas, but in the sefer, which we're talking about, the width of the mavui is more than 10 amas, or if the depth is more than 10 amas, we're talking about measurements of matzum tzamas. Sorry, for the width is matzum tzamas. Why? We're always being machmir in this situation. Now, what is the shirim of rachim? The shirim of rachim yesal tzamas hu chatzi etzba la'amah. The difference between an expansive amah and a non-expansive amah is chatzi etzba la'amah. Half an etzba per amah, so a small amount. Yeseme ese, but if the width of the stretch across the mavui is more than 10 amas, if it hasn't got a Shem Pesach and the Lech in the Korah is not going to help you, or if it goes back, Yosem Esa Amas Mutzum Somas, right? So the width is across is more than 10 Amas Mutzum Somas. We measure each of the 6 tfachim of every amma in a non-expansive way, in a very narrow way. V'chein b'sefer, and so too in the sefer, that Orach hamavi boinan arba amas mervachas. And likewise, we're being machmir. When you want 4 amas depth of the mavi, we use the measurement which is mervachas, which is we need 4 expansive, big amas. Nami hachi u'demoidin tfachim mervachim v'imkein yitaysev al arba amas shnei etzbois. So on 4 amas, it's going to turn out that it's going to be shnei etzbois, because it's 1/2 an etzba per amma. So for 4 ammas, it's going to be shnei etzbois, 2 finger breadths more than regular 4 ammas. Okay, or if it doesn't go in arba ammas, arke arba ammas, it's a bepachas mishiyazeh lo chashuva kamovi ele kachotze. It's not really a movi; it's just like another chotze. So then the only way to rectify it is b'tzuras hapesach hainu. Says the Mishnah Berurah Tzadi Gimel, ta'afilim hoya nomach pachas me'asara. Even if it was lower than 10 tfachim. Gam kein mahani tzuras hapesach. Tzuras hapesach is going to help you. V'chein berachav me'esa amas. So too, if it's wider than 10 amas, tzuras hapesach is going to help you. Or shelo hiya arka arba amas, or if it wasn't 4 amas deep. Aval harba achronim hiskimu l'dina. T'im hoya chalal hamov nomach pachas me'asara tfachim. Lo mahani tzuras hapesach. Many achronim say that if the height of the mavui is less than 10 tfachim, a tzuras hapesach is not going to help you. Because even a mechitza is not going to help you if it's not 10 tfachim tall. And kol shekein tzuras hapesach ba'alma, which is like a makeshift mechitza. It's like it's another form of mechitza. Ochein im chalal hamavi hoygva asar tfachim. If, however, the mavi was of 10 tfachim height, v'rak b'mokum pesach hamavi hoynamach me'asar, but just at the entrance it's less than 10. B'zeh mahani tzuras hapesach. Then a tzuras hapesach will help you. V'husha also can, so long as it's constructed properly. Dahainu shahayu akonim gavoyin asar tfachim, that the side beams of the tzuras hapesach are more than 10 tfachim. V'da'oid, and know also, de'imlo hoya arka arba amas, if it wasn't 4 amas long, das kama poiskim the din kachotze, it will have the din of a chotze, val kein nitzagam kein bepas arba, and you've got another solution, not only at tzuras hapesach, but you could use the pas arba, that board of 4 tfachim wide, mitzad echad, shnei pasin shel mashrin mishnei athodin, or 2 pasin of even a thin strip on each side. V'chein sosam machal ba'azon lekam b'sivlan beis v'machal b'shekosov elav tzuras hapesach lav dafka nokat, because really the pas arba would help you. Okay, let's continue. Where are we? Ve'im. Yeah. So back to the Mechaber. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines down. Ve'im hoya begoiva chalolo yoseme esrim. If the airspace was now too high, previously we were talking about where it's too small. If the airspace was more than 20 amas, mitzum tzomas exactly, eino nitza bekoira. A koira is not going to help you. Avol nitzahu belechi, but a lechi will help you. And if you want to use a koira, then you've got to make the koira shining and flashing and lighting, and you've got to make it really stand out. It literally means you've got to decorate it. Echod b'kaisel min hasid al shmei koira. You decorate it, you paint it sort of flashing colors or something that gets your attention. Shal dekacha kol mistaklim, but everyone would see it. If you look at the Mishnah Berurah, begoiva chalolo, avlim in Sadi Dalet, avlim begoiva chalolo shel hamovi al koira ein ela esrim mitzum tzomes. If you've only got 20 amas mitzum tzomes, aval pisha koira lemal mi esrim. Even though the koira is more than 20, kasheira, because it's mitzum tzum, we're going to allow that. Ein nitza b'koira to koira mishum heka, because the whole point is that the koira is there as a heka, that it's a mavu and it's not a rish sarabim. That's the whole purpose of this. Well, a malam yesrim ain't heka, but if it's more than 20 amas, that's not a good heka. The loy shol to bo'ena, that it doesn't, the eye won't catch it. Avalechi shel somach lekarka, which is ground level. V'sagi begoiva asar tfachim and kain mamazik shel goiva raharbe. That doesn't bother us because you've got your heka. So the lechi will be okay, but the koira will not be okay if it's more than 20 amas. Okay, let's just do one more sentence. We're at the bottom line of the Mechaber. If the height of the Mavi is more than 20, and you build it like a little step underneath the koira, like at the very entrance, to make it less than 20 amas high, that would suffice. If you look at picture number 80, he's done exactly that. Can you see? He's built a little a step. At the front, so that you've got less than 20 amas at that little spot. that would work. But if it's not more than 10 tefachim high, and you dig down to make it more than 10 tefachim height, in that situation, if you want to dig for, you want to make sure it's 10 tefachim high, the minute that it catches the maximum, it's more than the minimum height, then it's not enough to just do one tefach. You've got to go further, and you've got to go 4 amas in. Okay. So when it comes to the height, all you need is a 1 tefach strip underneath the Korah, that would suffice. But if you're talking about the minimum measurement, which is 10 tefachim, then you're being chaykik, you're digging down to get a height of 10 tefachim, then you've got to go 4 amas in. Let's just do the Mishnah on that. Tzadi Vav lemata me'esrim v'uadin diyochel lahashbel asakera. You don't have to put a step there. What you could do is just reduce the Korah. You could, make the height less than 20. But binyan roch of tefach. So what you want to do is, you want to just make a little step of tefach. V'hu adin says Mishbur Tzadi Zayin. Ofar kishiyozeh, you want to put a little mound of earth there. V'tzorich lizoy kishinidrus beraglaim shelo yismayit mishir rachava. You got to be careful if you're going to put a mound of earth that you don't sort of get rid of it by stepping on it, and then you'll lose your step, and you'll lose your tikkun, and you'll lose your 20 amas height, because it will become more than 20 amas. You've got a problem. That it shouldn't make a gap of more than 20. Okay, and you only need to do it according to the thickness of the beam, which is of course 1 tefach. The Bashir Tefach, V'chanal B'sif Yud Zayin. V'atam the Mahani Reich Tefach, Do Kaimelon Mutter Lishtamish Tachas HaKorah. Now what's the svara? The lomdus is that you're allowed to use the area Tachas HaKorah. V'ha'omed Alusim Hakom. And therefore, if you're standing on this step, and Yuchel Liros HaKorah, it's within 20 amas, and therefore I can see the Korah. That's why it works. However, if you're digging deep and you want to make a height of 10 tefachim, which is to make sure it's got the minimum height, then 1 tefach is not enough. You've got to go in 4 amas. Why? But previously it was okay for a tefach, says Mishmur Tzadites. Shani hacha, here, when you're doing a minimum of 10 tefachim, hacha de pachas me'asar tefachim, lo mikri dofen klal. It's not called a dofen. That's the point. The shavya dofen. To create a dofen, you've got to go 4 amas in. So you've got a height of 10 tefachim, you've got to have a wall which goes in 4 amas. But in the case of the wall, mikri dofen, it's a wall. It's called the wall. It's just too tall. And therefore, you're just fixing your existing wall by making a step of 1 tefach under the Korah, and therefore you step on the Korah and you step on the tefach and you can see the Korah is a good heka, so you're okay. You've got to make 4 amas into the mavui. If you dig down less than this, then dafka pasar bo, shnei pasin shnei mashrin kedin hachotze. Then you got to come onto the tikkunim for a chotze. V'chanal soifti ba'maschel ela. Okay, I'll kolpnei rachbay. Says the Mishbura, kufaleftim yishoy hefsek bein chakika bein aksolim. If there's a gap between where you've dug down and the walls, lo yuchla aksolim itzaref lo, and you can't join the walls. Or ve'ein haksolim lemovi dom. It's as if there's a movi without walls. Then you could apply lova to that. Okay, Beseda. So you've got to make sure what we've said, and we'll continue this in Hashem next time. But the point is, on Chof Vav, the idea is that when do we say a lechi and a korah help you when you've got those 3 dimensions, i.e., it's less than 20 amas tall, or it's more than 10 tefachim, or more than 10 tefachim high, and it goes in 4 amas. If you haven't got that, then you're going to have to come on to other tikkunim such as the Surah Pesach or Pasar Bo, etc. Okay, Beseda.
It's just